The passage I just read to you is one of Jesus's references to the Holy Spirit given to his disciples, particularly in the time when he felt that they were starting to feel anxious, perhaps seeing, the storm gathering in anticipation of what would happen to him at the end of his life. I think he saw, and the friends saw, the increasing hostility of the authorities and the religious leaders to Jesus, and they were understandably troubled. And so Jesus, in an attempt to alleviate some of his worries, spoke to them about that he will never actually leave them. They will always feel his presence. He said, I will not leave you as orphans, meaning we will always have this connection, the guiding, helping kind of a presence, which actually we sometimes feel when our loved ones leave us. We still sometimes feel like we're guided by this presence of our loved ones. And here Jesus names it as the Holy Spirit, which of course is not the first time his friends would have heard the word God's Spirit. It is there in the Old Testament. It is present at creation. It is who speaks through the prophets. So it's a familiar language, familiar term to them. But Jesus used it in a more personal way here. He used the word from the legal lexicon, the advocate, a paraclete. So the one who, in the Greek sense of this word, would be the one who stands in a legal court as your defender, as the one who speaks on your behalf when you can't. And it is in that sense of this word that I thought of an incident from my own ministry that I wanted to share. And I wanted to show you the parallel between that and the story from the book of Acts, which was, in fact, an episode in the ministry of the Apostle Paul. So, and as I said earlier, we all have a ministry to each other. And I find that in that ministry, yes, we're guided and helped by the Spirit. Sometimes we're given words to say, to comfort somebody that you feel like they come from somewhere almost like despite yourself, or you wouldn't have thought about those words if you wanted to, yet they pop into your mind at the right time. Yes, we do have that, but I also find that God puts us in situations where we quite often don't want to be, where we feel ill-equipped to help, and frankly might be nervous or scared to be in, and sometimes for a good reason, and then the Spirit gives us the words to say. So on our part, there is this willingness to enter such situations where we are sometimes put against our will almost, but we still participate. And then there is the help that God sends to us as he almost speaks on our behalf, even though it's through our mouth. So Paul, as Jeremy read to us, found himself in Athens, in the Greek city, in a potentially precarious situation. When he arrived, he started to tell people about his understanding of the Jewish God, that he knew since having grown up as a Jew, studying Jewish scriptures, as well as the Greek ones, which will come in handy in a few moments. But he went on his journeys and he was telling people about this kind of a newer iteration of Judaism that he began to believe, and getting himself in trouble at times, many times actually. So speaking of some real danger that he encountered. And here in Athens, it was illegal actually to talk and preach about the gods who were not named in the Greek pantheon. And he was borderline starting to do that. And I'm saying borderline because in the city of Athens, and even as Paul himself referred to and noticed, there were these altars, outdoor little shrines, which had the inscription to the unknown God. So because there was this precedent, Paul actually could talk about a God who was yet not fully known by the Athenians and yet helped them. And so when Paul was summoned to this place called the Areopagus, which was basically like a rocky hill just outside of Athens, he had to speak to the philosophers who gathered there for that purpose, to debate new ideas, even though that might have been a dangerous situation to be in, but they still enjoyed the debate. And having seen these altars to the unknown God, Paul chose that as his starting point in the sermon that was recorded in the book of Acts and became one of his most famous addresses to be recorded. So he said, you have been, speaking to the Athenians, you have been historically in a situation which they would have known about when you have felt essentially orphaned, abandoned by all gods. He was referring to the time in history about 6 centuries before his arrival and Jesus' time, when Athens was struck by a plague and sacrifices were offered to all kinds of gods that were known to them, named gods, Zeus probably, Artemis, all sorts. And then nothing worked until the Athenians went to a prophet who was also a poet, Epimenides, and he recommended to follow the sheep in the morning when the sheep are really hungry and to watch where they would lie down instead of eating, which they shouldn't want to do because they're hungry. And mark those places with a shrine, with an altar, and say, to the unknown God. So the Athenians have done that 6 centuries before Paul, and apparently it worked, or so they thought. The plague went away. And the archaeologists now have actually discovered these altars. So there is evidence for their existence. And so Paul quotes this episode in the history of Athens when they made an appeal to this God whom they didn't actually know yet, fully couldn't name, yet that God intervened in their history. The philosophers to whom Paul was talking were Stoics, and Epicureans who actually believed in an existence of a God above all the named gods, who was this ultimate reality who didn't have a name, but because that God was so lofty and above all others whom they had these stories and myths about their meddling, sometimes helping, sometimes meddling in human affairs, well, that one that was not named and above all them was seen to be too distant. So here Paul connects this historical time period with the philosophical belief that there actually is a great supreme deity above the ones who live in shrines and temples and the statues are made of them. And then he quotes 2 poets from the Greek literature. He probably studied them when he studied everything else, including the Jewish scriptures. He was a highly educated man with broad erudition. But can you imagine just quoting Greek poets on your feet like that, connecting a historical moment from centuries before, and now 2 separate poets? One poet was the Greek guy who gave the advice about following the sheep, and the other was a Stoic. So that's why Paul here says, one of your guys said this. And so the quotes he provides, we have partial quotes in the biblical text, but they both talk about Zeus. So he quotes to them Greek poetry about their great deity. And so from the man who suggested about the sheep, he quotes, "They fashioned a tomb for you, but you're not dead. You live and abide, and in you we live and move and have our being." One of the most beloved Anglican quotes comes from this Greek poet, prophet, and is spoken, in fact, about Zeus, but it says crucially that he's not dead because he lives in us, which is quite the same concept as the presence of the Holy Spirit. And then from the Stoic poet, he quotes, "You too are his offspring." And before that segment of a phrase of the quote, he says, "Every street and marketplace and harbor and sea are full of you." So he speaks to the indwelling of God, this great God, above all, yet present in daily circumstances and places, even like the marketplace. And what's more, you are his children. He cares about you. He cares for you when all the other gods with a smaller g, even the ones you know, like Zeus, have turned away from you. It's a powerful message that you would hear if you had the ears, or that is the cultural context and the education to hear. But it's even more remarkable to be able to put it together on impulse, on the spot. And I believe that Paul's education was his achievement. He put in the effort to study the Stoics and the Greeks and his own history and religion. But the way that he was able to connect these ideas so that people believed in his argument about this God was born of the Spirit. So I think this is similar to how we sometimes have the right words that pop out of the depth of our own knowledge, but come out in these remarkable ways that we can affect what others are feeling or thinking, and hopefully to help them in doing so. And so I'm connecting this to the story that came to my mind about my ministry. Again, why did it come to my mind a couple of weeks ago? I don't know. It's just a memory that popped up. But then I thought to myself, well, isn't this a perfect connection to tell this story? So even that is the movement within that I recognize as possibly the movement of the Holy Spirit. And it has to do with that idea of being put in the situations where you have to say something about God to somebody who's struggling when you are least inclined to do that. For me, most normally this happens in grocery stores, where I'm in a rush to pick up the kids from school, and yet there's somebody always in the middle of the aisle wanting to tell me everything about how their parents raised them and done everything wrong, and every food allergy they have and what they struggle with. Just unload. And I'm thinking, okay, it's 3:15. So this one, however, tops it all, in my opinion. It happened when I was running at the cottage where I stay in the summer. I went for a run one morning, went a little bit further than I usually go, so found myself in a remote, kind of quiet road by the lake. Nobody there until I saw this lady, an older woman, standing in the middle of the road. Interestingly, the road motif, it's in the scriptures too, but so here we're on this road together now, nobody else. She's wearing just her pajamas and crying. And so I think, actually, I didn't even get a chance to think. I just impulsively asked her, what's wrong? And in the course of this conversation, she told me that she was contemplating ending her life because of something horrible, in her opinion it was horrible, that she has done in the past. So she had this terrible guilt, and she said that her family will abandon her, right? So again, that theme of belonging and abandonment, if they only knew what she had done. And so she thought the best way was just to end it. And so, what do you do? What would you do? I tried, first of all, well, my first impulse was to look at those pajamas and see what could be hidden anywhere that could be harmful to both of us, me, first of all. But you could see that she was quite unarmed, and really she was older and couldn't really walk too well. So I assessed myself not to be in great danger with this potentially unstable person. But then my next step was to find out if she really had a way of accomplishing what she was thinking there at the cottage. She said no. So I decided against calling 911 right there and then, which I think I would have if I had an indication that she had the means there and was alone. And then we talked some more about where in her life she still had glimpses of belonging. And then I told her that I think that God forgives everything. And that then I revealed that I am a minister in the church, and that's why this is my belief, and that out of this kind of a belief, I really perform my ministry. And her reaction was immediate. She lit up, and she said, she asked for an absolution, which I gave, which was an interesting thing. Outside the church context, no stoles, no robes, no altar, no church building. And so I gave it, and really nothing happened. So no outward, like, okay, I'm great now. No. And she never told me what it was that she was so guilty about, so burdened with. But I could see a measure of peace that came upon her. It was tangible. And then I felt comfortable to leave her. But as I left, I started to feel more and more aware of how I was alone in a remote place with an unstable individual, potentially. And so I ran home quite a bit faster than I got there. But I kept the story in my mind for years, and really, to me, it's full of the manifestation of the Holy Spirit and the reminder that it works through all of us in the most unexpected times, despite ourselves, through the words we learned somewhere else for some other purpose. Like I can give an absolution in the church, and I do it, but I never thought I would have to do it like that, in that case. So the words came, the desire to help came, the fear was not there in the encounter, it came later. So, I mean, it is a little bit similar to Paul's encounter, where the danger could have actually been there for both of us. The words we learned from before came to our mind, and there was an effect on the people with whom we interacted, and none of it was planned. So I hope we all continue to keep our eyes open to these encounters. You never know who you'll see on the street today or tomorrow or the day after. And pray for God's help to speak through you. Whereas at the same time, though, continue to ponder what God's presence means to you. So we can't rely entirely on this divine inspiration, but we have to allow it to work through what we already know. I think that's the only way, to be open, prepared, and unprepared at the same time, and let the Spirit work in us so we can be an advocate, a comforter, a guide to somebody in need. Thanks be to God.